Don't be a Chicken Little. Find out how on this episode of Pushback.
Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Hello everyone, this is Pushback and I'm Dr. Jonny. I'm continuing a series this year really about addressing these cultural issues that affect us as families and very specifically our children. I believe that there are actually policies and cultural shifts that are taking place that are actually killing our kids. And I'm trying to raise a fervor, an awareness, and an understanding of the things that are happening in this culture, not to bring fear, not to create sort of a pessimistic viewpoint, but to open eyes to the things that are happening because we actually affect culture. We actually set the culture. We are the ambassadors of heaven. We are here on this earth to actually bring shift and to bring awareness and open the eyes of people so that they are healthy and that they are well, that they are living in boundaries. And so I talked first to parents very specifically because I believe we really don't have to go much further than parents. If parents would just rise up and take the reins of leading their family into positive cultural aspects, following the ways of God, then I think things will fall into place because as family goes, so goes the culture. The second season or second shift that I'm in now is really talking about what I call pseudo-science. I believe that technology and science play such an impactful role in our lives. And as a scientist, I take this very personally. And how, if we're not careful, we actually get swept into the political fray or the godless religion fray, and science becomes something completely different. It's called pseudoscience. It's actually not following any type of scientific scrutiny. So I've been talking about that at length and talking about my profession in medicine. And today I want to shift into what's referred to as climate change. I've talked about this before and there's been previous podcasts on this, but I want to talk again very specifically how this is impacting the younger generation. I'm not just going to bore you with, carbon dioxide stats, although those are important that we dig into those issues, but I want to talk about the impact that a movement can actually have on a younger generation, a movement that's not really founded on good science. And that's what we're talking about because we have to be able to rely on our scientists to give us accurate, meaningful information for us to actually make a change and a difference. I cited in a previous podcast that over 1,600 scientists, including 2 Nobel laureates, actually signed a declaration saying that there is no climate emergency. It wasn't getting a lot of attention from mainstream media, not surprisingly, but it's important to know that the mass climate hysteria and the destruction of the U.S. economy in the name of climate needs to stop. And so these scientists push back. They pushed back. And that's what this podcast is all about. Let's be real scientists here. In their statement that they wrote back in 2023, they wrote that climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. They said that the climate policy relies on inadequate models, and climate models have many shortcomings that are not remotely plausible as policy tools. They ignore the fact that enriching the atmosphere with CO2 is beneficial, and there's no statistical evidence that global warming is intensifying hurricanes, floods, droughts, and such like natural disasters or making them more frequent. It's not what the news is telling us. Every tornado, every flood, every storm, every hurricane is the result of climate change. And just to be very clear, this used to be called global warming until that data started to fall to the wayside. And now they just called it climate change. It's just a general umbrella for every problem that we have in our environment has to be because of climate change and man's impact on the climate. Stephen E. Koonin, former Undersecretary for Science of the U.S. Department of Energy, said, "I was taught that you tell the whole truth as a scientist." He noted as well as the immorality of asking the developing world to cut down emissions while so many do not even have access to electricity, the immorality of scaring the younger generations. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the issue. There's something that's happening here, not based on accurate scientific data, that is actually impacting the younger generation. How? It is because it's twofold. Number one is it is bankrupting our economy. The price tag on transitioning from cheap fossil fuels to a zero carbon emission type outlook by 2050 or whatever the overall goal or plan is bankrupting our economy. This is a big deal. This disproportionately affects the poor in our country. And it disproportionately affects the younger people in our country as well. But there's even something more sinister at play in this. Excuse me. That the scare tactics are having a real meaningful effect on this younger generation who is being told that the sky is falling. Enter Chicken Little. Chicken Little had a narrative that he believed to be true. And as the narrative proceeded, it became a reality to Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the end of the world as we know it. And our younger generation is being raised with this narrative that's being told to them over and over again, that if things don't change, and things don't change dramatically, that this will be the end of the world as they know it. And are you telling me that has no impact on a fifth grader? On a young person who's hearing about these quote unquote truths? When the reality is, according to these scientific community, that there is no climate emergency. See, we're concerned about the widespread poverty, massive starvation that will be caused by the unavailability of cheap and reliable energy in underdeveloped countries, or the inflation caused by the skyrocketing prices that are crushing Americans barely able to afford one meal a day. And boy, has that become prophetic. The skyrocketing inflation that we've been seeing is a direct result of the overspending and zealousness of these climate alarmists that are taking our country into bankruptcy. They write in their position, never mind that much of climate change is apparently caused by sun flares, about which we can do nothing, and which, unlike commercial industries, do not offer grants, or that major wildfires are ironically exacerbated by environmentalists for refusing to let tinderbox brush be cleared, lest the creatures be disturbed by other than by a wildfire. Only when green energy is cheaper than fossil fuels will the world be able or willing to make the transition. And who knows if that's ever going to take place. In fact, these big wind generators are starting to shut down. The funding isn't there. The economics is simply not there. The statement adds, the geological archive reveals that the Earth's climate has varied as long as the planet has existed, with natural cold and warm phases. The little ice age ended as recently as 1850. Therefore, it's no surprise that we are now experiencing a period of warming. We can look no further than the Bible and what the Bible says post-flood, that we would expect the earth to be gradually warming. But interestingly, it's warming far slower than predicted. The gap between the real world and the modeled world tells us that we are far from understanding climate change. Global warming has not increased natural disasters. In their policy, they wrote, climate policy must respect scientific and economic realities. There is no climate emergency. Therefore, there is no cause for panic and alarm. We strongly oppose the harmful and unrealistic net zero CO2 policy proposed for 2050. See, when we create a narrative like Chicken Little did, then we can create an alarmist type response that actually happens to people when they believe that these things are true. When I rolled this out, I received some pushback on my pushback because people care about the environment and people care about God's creation. People care about taking care of our world. And I would like to defend the fact that I feel like I'm one of those people that are on the forefront and the front lines of this. I have a wind turbine on my property. I have geothermal. My kids will testify. I stop and pick up every little piece of garbage along the way in my property because I care. I care about the world. I care about this land. I believe that we've actually been given the mandate to subdue the earth and to care for it. And so there's a response of even some of my listeners who are like, yeah, but we're still very responsible. This could just be a hoax. This could be an overinflation or an overestimation. However, we can't minimize the importance of our environment. And I want to say that there's absolutely no arguments for me on that. However, when we claim an emergency, when we say the sky is falling, we have to ask why. Why are we setting off alarms about data that actually aren't real? There might be some good intentions, but at the root of it is fear to create policy change. And usually at the root of all of these things are power and money. And I hate to sound so skeptical or jaded about that, but we have to understand that there is big money in this climate change proposal and policies. And we are subsidizing it with our tax money, and we're going to be subsidizing it more as these companies begin to fail. We get to pay for it twice. And that's what is happening. That's what we're seeing in our economy. And it's disproportionately affecting the poor in our country who can't afford basic fuel prices and food. This is the snowball effect of the sky is falling policies, trying to fear you, scare you into change or action. Now, some of the pushback I received is that there's a lot of data on the other side, that there's big oil companies sponsoring some data that tends to look a little suspicious as well. But this is one critical difference, and I always want to make this an important scientific distinction. If you make a claim that requires a change, then you have the burden of proof. You have the burden of proof. So is 1,600 scientists saying that this is a hoax, that there is no emergency, is that enough? I would say, yeah, it's enough to at least raise our eyebrows and cause us to pause, to hesitate, and to say, is the data real? We dig into it. That's what scientists do. That's the whole point of this season of podcasts that I'm trying to lay out. Scientists scrutinize, scientists research, scientists observe, plan, study, and create data. And we have to break down the data and find out if it's real first before we make policy changes, especially policy changes that affect our younger people, that affect the poor, affect those who are being so devastated by these economic changes. Claims of global warming have simply proved wrong. I can't say it any other way, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Climate change is not accurate. Ozone is actually closing, not opening or becoming bigger. The polar ice caps are actually expanding, not shrinking. Their claims haven't been satisfied by the burden of proof, and they need to explain that, not me. They need to explain it and find out why this is the case. And is it possible that they're wrong? That's it. That's the end of the discussion. Because as long as the science isn't there, then we don't move with policy and with change. That's the key. And especially when it hurts us, when the change actually causes such a degree of pain. Like, for instance, you can say, well, taking care of the environment is good. So any environmentalists and their plan to fix the environment or to clean the air, that has to also be good. Well, we can't make those connections unless the science is there. Now, again, I am not arguing about cleaning up the oceans and cleaning up the air and taking care of our land. The question is the carbon dioxide levels, is the emissions that is taking place because of man's influence here on this earth, is that causing climate change? And I would submit to you that the evidence isn't strong enough for us to bankrupt our economy over it, for us to scare our children over it. The science just isn't there. It's pseudo-science. And I ask you, I implore you to dig into those facts. Now you can look at something like welfare, taking care of the people who are poor or needy, or that safety net. Now you can say that that is good, like the environment is good. And I would agree with you. I believe that taking care of those who are in need and having a safety net around people is good. Now, then you can say anything that we do through the welfare system then is also good. Not unless the science shows it or proves it. And not to go into the weeds in my analogy, but studies have shown simply throwing money at the poor doesn't help them. So should we do it? There should be a better way then, and we should research that, and we should pause until we find that better way. It's helping them and using science to augment our plans and our systems. And we study those things and we find out how we truly can help them the best way. So take that analogy and push it in towards environmentalism. I'm an environmentalist. I love the earth. I love nature. I love being in it. And I get outraged when there is pollution or God's nature is not being cared for appropriately. I'm completely with you on all of those issues. But if we simply say, because of that, then we need to borrow money from China and we need to shut down all fossil fuels and we need to become electric only by 2050, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences to the younger generations, I believe is short-sighted and in error and not based on scientific data. This is what I'm imploring in this podcast, that our eyes would be open to what is true, what is scientific, and what are the facts. And we need to question motives, whether the paper is written by the Biden administration or by big oil companies. We need to take those data into account. But if there are holes, if the data falls apart, if the claims that you're making are not true, are not scientifically sound, then there needs to be pause. We need to research it further. This is how science works. And if there's proof 100% that mankind is causing problems and the ozone is opening and we're all going to burn, then yes, I'm all on board. But we need to be scientific about this. And we need to know where the burden of proof is. And the burden of proof is the one that's making policy change based on a supposed scientific reality that simply isn't there. So I don't believe that we should pursue pseudoscience, and I don't believe that we should pursue fear tactics. I don't believe that's healthy for any environment. I don't believe that we need to conceal truth I don't think that we need to hide it or to sugarcoat it. That's not what I'm saying. But to create a narrative, just like Chicken Little did, create a narrative that the sky is falling, when the data doesn't show that that's actually true, it causes pain, it causes dysfunction, it causes relational problems, causes economic disaster, and our children are the ones who are hurt. Really what this comes down to is scientists being scientists. I feel like I'm just going to keep ringing this bell. If the scientists just become and remain scientists, then the truth will actually come out. The data will show what should be done next. But instead, there's big money and there's hands in the pockets and politicians are involved, and they're creating a narrative that I believe is destructive. I believe there's plenty of data around environmental causes that we should be sowing into personally and collectively as a country. Let's focus on those things. Let's focus on mitigating disasters, which we've actually done quite well. We're now living in an era where the death rates from tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes are at an all-time low because scientists have moved in and offered alternatives, ways to build buildings, infrastructure plans to actually mitigate the damage from natural disasters. That's how science works. When it comes to climate change, this nebulous term without a lot of solid data behind it is not an avenue we should go down until the science shows it better. That's all I'm asking. Let scientists be scientists. We don't hire or promote pseudo-science as the way of going forward unless there's some agenda or political avenue that's trying to take place and trying to foster these policies. I'd love to talk more about this. I know there's been some response to these in the past. I would like to hear your continued opinions on these things. But I want to show, and hopefully you feel my heart, how much I care about the environment. But we need to pursue with scientific acumen and proceed correctly based on what the science shows. And honestly, in a lot of ways, on what the Bible shows, what the Bible would predict would happen in a post-flood environment. Kind of makes sense. So often, I would say maybe even 100% of the time, science is going to back up Scripture because we know that that is true. And science is simply a discovery of God's perfect plan and provision for us here on this earth. I love this earth, by the way. We've had the most beautiful week. I love being out on my land. I love enjoying nature. What a gift that God has given us. Just talking to my in-laws about sunsets and the beautiful creation that the Father's created for us. And my in-laws sit almost every night and enjoy the artwork of God up in the sky. This is such a privilege for us to be there, and we want to protect our land and take care of it the best that we can. On that we can agree. Now we need scientists to be scientists and find out how we can maximize our presence here on this earth and create the culture of heaven and reproduce it here on earth. Thanks for listening to me again today. I so love talking about this. I so love science, and I love you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, let's go together now to set and shape the culture.